Hi, I'm Robert. Welcome to my channel. This is a reading of my latest book, My Nineveh, The Cross Between Psychedelics and the Church. It is available now on Amazon. If you like this work and would like to support me, please like and subscribe, and consider purchasing a copy from the link in the description below. Chapter 7, There Be Dragons. There are many different varieties of magic mushrooms. I decided to order the spores of 4 different breeds, all in the genus Psilocybe cubensis. As with DMT, the cost of entry into this type of psychedelic use was under $100. While that represented fewer psychedelic experiences, unlike DMT, they lasted 4 to 6 hours, not minutes. For the type of growth I was after, the longer experience was a massive opportunity for insight. Even though I was becoming quite comfortable working with DMT, there was one experience in particular that kept eluding me. In the psychonaut community, it went by the name ego death. Across the board, the message was the same. You'll know it if or when you experience it, and if you're asking about it, then you haven't had it. It was a club you had to initiate yourself into, or for some, end up unwittingly. My initiation into non-dual states of consciousness happened the weekend before the 2019 New Year. The plan was originally to enjoy a more intimate time with my lovely wife while under the influence of magic mushrooms. However, we had a little baby at the time who could be quite the chore putting to bed, and my wife often became tired enough during that process that sleep was foremost in her mind. Unlike DMT, magic mushrooms have a come-up period, a time between consumption and experience that can last an hour or more. I had consumed a dose of mushrooms, and the world was already starting to shift on me when my wife came back downstairs and told me she just wanted some rest. In my slightly inebriated state, I thought it would be a good idea to take a couple more mushrooms and see if this ego death might happen, given that la petite mort was no longer an option. I settled down in the front room on the daybed while the rest of the house slept upstairs. As the evening turned into night, my mind retreated fully into hallucinations. The world was gone. I was gone. I still had a running chatter in my mind about the sensations I was experiencing, which were largely pleasant. I can't remember the exact order of events, but eventually a couple of ideas presented themselves in the experience that completely changed my perspective on reality. Looking back, any of the ideas could have been the trigger itself, as they were something like a self-supporting structure in my mind that once compromised could never be rebuilt. I began to think about my brother Tom, who at this point had been dead for about 9 months. I asked, why did he have to die? And the answer came back as though from another entity. So you would take the mushrooms. At this point, something triggered in my mind. Who was this other voice? I knew that it was true. I was far too much of a square to have bothered to grow these magic mushrooms without the extreme motivation and curiosity brought on by his death. That event led directly to this event, and here in my mind, I met a teacher. This shouldn't have been a surprise to me. After all, I had met other entities, like the anima, before, yet somehow this time it was different. I remembered that this was me on drugs, so there were 2 voices in my head. Why was I never aware of this before? The thought occurred to me that every other voice I had ever heard in my entire life had been heard in my head alongside my own. Where else could I hear a voice? Everything I had ever seen, or touched, or smelled, thought, any experience I had ever had, all happened in the same place, consciousness. Everything was qualia, and all qualia was experienced in one place. There was never an other. It was always experienced within me, within my consciousness. I thought of another question. What is time? My answer came back in the form of a vision of the mighty dragon Ouroboros. This was the Leviathan written about in the book of Job. It spun in the void, eating its tail, self-generating and self-consuming in front of me. All around the dragon were eyes, watching, aware. There was no point in this space, this void, that was not aware. In an instant, I became the Ouroboros. For Robert, this experience was a death, a terrifying ripping of everything Robert held dear. His last thoughts were, I really must have done it this time. How stupid, growing poisonous mushrooms. I must have made a mistake. Of course, in consensus reality, the mushrooms were doing exactly what they do, and Robert was in no real danger at all. Magic mushrooms are not toxic, and my body would continue living. However, the psychological structure that Robert identified with, the ego, was shutting down. And that experience was death to Robert. Egos are funny. They always make up a story about what they are experiencing. As the ego died, there was no capacity to remember anything, no self to have a past or experience a human life. All memory of being Robert erased in an instant. There was no mushrooms, no family, no history, no life, no I for anyone to connect to. There wasn't even language. Whatever state of consciousness being experienced was prior to anything human, even prior to the universe itself. There was no longer anticipating anything, no ability to comprehend the future, no memory of the past. What remained was the understanding. I am now, and now is eternity. There is no beginning to this moment and no end. There was no place to go, no place to have been, no body, no family, no world, no universe, nothing. This is being hyper awake, hyper aware. My ego began to flicker on and off, and I had visions of other journeys to this state of consciousness. It always led back to the mushrooms, or meditation, or a near-death experience, or death. There was always a return back to here. There is only I, alone, in eternity. There is no pain, no sensation of any kind. There is no inside or outside, just being. There is no good or bad, just unconditional love. There is no creation, just self. This is the most real, the absolute, the uncreated and undivided, Alpha and Omega, without beginning and without end. I always left plenty of signs for this return back to eternity, breadcrumbs in the dream. I would dream religions, spiritual practices, rituals, in all kinds of plants and animals with the capacity to induce psychedelic experiences. I would come as guides and gurus. Every other person was a helper to me, for me, on this trip home. All the suffering, the deaths, everything designed to help me remember this divinity. It was even better than that. Every other entity was also me on their journey back. We are helping each other by providing multiple sides to every experience. I am Jesus and the Buddha. I was every person that had ever lived, every plant and animal, every living being. I am the stars and galaxies, the universe itself. I am the all-experiencer. I am. At some point in the night, the peak of the experience wore off, and I began to remember my life. My consciousness once again condensed down and wrapped itself into form. I remembered that I was Robert and that I have a family that I love. Normal consensus reality re-solidified around me as I re-entered the cosmic dream. I went upstairs and laid down next to my sleeping wife and child, now fully aware of the spark of divinity that is in each of them, indeed, that permeates all of existence. I knew I had experienced something profound, but I didn't have the words to even come close to describing it.